On the night of March 18th, 2026, Israeli warplanes bombed the most important piece of energy infrastructure on the planet. Not a refinery, not a storage depot, the actual source, the upstream production heart of the world's single largest natural gas field, South Pars, a 9,700 square kilometre geological giant sitting beneath the Persian Gulf, straddling the maritime border between Iran and Qatar. The strike hit processing facilities at Assaluya on Iran's Gulf coastline, the onshore hub where South Pars gas is treated and pumped into the country's grid. The governor of Assaluya confirmed the facilities were taken offline to control fires. 2 refinery units with a combined capacity of 100 million cubic meters per day went dark. Multiple field phases were shut down to stop the blaze from spreading. And within hours of that strike, Iran did exactly what it had publicly promised to do. It took the entire Gulf energy sector hostage. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through what just happened, why it changes the math of this war entirely, and what the clock now looks like for every country whose economy depends on a fifth of the world's gas supply. Before we go further, thank you for being here. Make sure you subscribe and hit like so this reaches people who need to see it. Here is what was struck, and why the scale of it matters more than almost any other attack in this conflict so far. South Pars, called the North Dome on the Qatari side, holds an estimated 1,800 trillion cubic feet of usable natural gas. That is roughly enough to supply the entire world's needs for 13 years. On the Iranian side alone, the field produces 730 million cubic meters of gas every single day as of February 2026, when production hit a record high. That output supplies around 70 to 75% of Iran's total domestic gas consumption. Power plants, heating systems, the petrochemical complexes that sustain what remains of Iran's sanctioned economy. When Assaluya went offline, Iranian gas exports to Iraq were halted simultaneously. Iraq depends on Iranian gas for between 1/3 and 40% of its electricity. Iraqi power grids started failing within hours. This is not a peripheral target. This is the lung of an entire regional energy system. But Israel did not only calculate the damage to Iran. It calculated what Iran would be forced to do next. And Iran's response was not a surgical strike. It was a declaration that the entire Gulf energy architecture is now a battlefield. Within hours of the South Pars attack, the IRGC issued evacuation warnings, not to military sites, but to named commercial energy facilities across 3 countries. Saudi Arabia's Samref refinery and Jubail petrochemical complex, the UAE's Al Hosn gas field, Qatar's Ras Laffan refinery, Mesaieed petrochemical complex, and Mesaieed holding company. These were not threats. They were advance notices. And then the strikes came. Qatar's Ras Laffan industrial city, the single largest liquefied natural gas production and export complex on the planet, was hit by Iranian ballistic missiles twice in under 12 hours. The first strike on March 18th caused what Qatar Energy described as extensive damage to the Pearl GTL gas-to-liquids facility, the largest gas-to-liquids plant in the world. Then, in the early hours of March 19th, several of Qatar's LNG facilities were struck again, causing what Qatar Energy described as sizable fires and extensive further damage. Qatar's Interior Ministry confirmed all fires had been contained with no injuries reported, but the damage was done, and it runs far deeper than the fires suggest. Qatar Energy's CEO Saad Al-Kaabi told Reuters on Thursday that the strikes knocked out 17% of Qatar's total LNG export capacity. He said repairs will take 3 to 5 years. Read that again, 3 to 5 years. This is not a 2-week recovery window. This is not infrastructure that gets patched and comes back online before summer. Wood Mackenzie, one of the leading energy analytics firms globally, published analysis on Thursday concluding that the attacks fundamentally reshape the global LNG outlook. Their words. Before these strikes, the firm had projected it would take 4 to 6 weeks to restore Qatari LNG production to full capacity once the war ended. That projection is now gone. A disruption lasting 5 to 6 months, according to Wood Mackenzie, would push annual global LNG supply into year-on-year decline. Each additional month of outage removes around 1.5% from annual global LNG availability. And Qatar had already been offline since March 2nd. Qatari LNG production has been halted for more than 2 weeks before these new strikes added structural damage on top of operations. Said damage was being assessed. 4 ballistic missiles were also intercepted heading toward Riyadh. On Thursday, Iran targeted Saudi Arabia's Samref refinery at Yanbu, the Red Sea port that has become Saudi Arabia's primary oil export outlet since the Strait of Hormuz was effectively closed at the start of this war. That single detail tells you what Iran is targeting. It is not hitting symbolic locations. It is targeting the bypass routes that Western-aligned Gulf states have been using to keep oil flowing since the Hormuz chokehold began on February 28th. In the UAE, air defences intercepted 7 Iranian missiles and 15 drones on Thursday alone. Since the war began, the UAE says it has intercepted a total of 349 Iranian missiles and over 1,700 drones. Operations at the Habshan gas facility and Bab oil field were suspended after falling debris from interceptions hit the sites. Abu Dhabi's media office described it as a dangerous escalation. The financial reaction was instantaneous. Brent crude, which opened the war at around $73 a barrel on February 28th, surged to over $116 on Thursday morning. That is a 59% jump in 3 weeks. The European TTF natural gas benchmark traded 24% higher on Thursday alone. American gasoline prices have climbed 17% since the conflict began. The S&P 500 dropped nearly 1% at the opening bell. The Nasdaq fell 1.3%. European indexes fell harder. The DAX dropped 3%. Flagship indexes in the UK, Italy, and France all dropped around 2.5%. That is the sound of the global economy absorbing a blow that has no precedent in the oil shock era. Not in structure, not in speed, not in geographic scope. Now we have to talk about what Donald Trump said, because it introduced a third dimension to an already two-dimensional conflict. On Wednesday night, Trump posted on Truth Social. He said Israel had, in his words, violently lashed out at South Pars out of anger over what has taken place in the Middle East. He said the United States knew nothing about the Israeli attack. He said Qatar was in no way, shape, or form involved. Then he said that Iran had unjustifiably and unfairly attacked Qatar's LNG facility in response, and declared that no more attacks would be made by Israel on what he called the extremely important and valuable South Pars field. But the threat that followed is the part that matters. Trump wrote that if Iran attacks Qatar again, the United States, with or without the help or consent of Israel, will massively blow up the entirety of the South Pars gas field at an amount of strength and power that Iran has never seen or witnessed before. He added that he did not want to authorize this level of violence and destruction because of the long-term implications for the future of Iran, but said he would not hesitate to do so. There are 2 things buried in that statement that have received almost no attention. The first is the phrase, long-term implications for the future of Iran. That is not the language of a leader who has abandoned regime change as an objective. That is the language of someone who is calibrating how much destruction to inflict on infrastructure a post-war Iran will need to rebuild its economy. Trump is thinking past the current government. He is thinking about what Iran looks like on the other side of this war. And he does not want to crater the energy foundations that a new Iranian government would depend on for reconstruction revenue. South Pars supplies 70 to 75% of Iran's domestic gas. Destroying it entirely does not weaken the IRGC. It destroys the civilian population's heating, power, and livelihoods for a generation. The second issue is the credibility of Trump's claim that the United States knew nothing about the South Pars strike. Multiple senior Israeli and American officials told Axios that the strike was coordinated between Netanyahu's office and the White House. A separate US defense official confirmed it. A source told the Associated Press that Washington was informed of Israel's plans before the strike. CNN sources concurred. The White House did not respond to multiple requests for comment. Trump's public disavowal served a clear diplomatic purpose. Qatar is furious. Saudi Arabia is furious. The Gulf states are now simultaneously condemning Israeli strikes on Iranian gas infrastructure, while absorbing Iranian retaliatory strikes on their military and security attachés persona non grata, and gave them 24 hours to leave the country. Saudi Arabia's foreign minister warned that Iran should immediately recalculate its strategy, and that Riyadh reserves the right to take military action if deemed necessary. The Arab League Secretary General called the Iranian strikes a dangerous escalation. 12 Arab and Islamic foreign ministers met in Riyadh on Thursday and issued a joint statement condemning Iran's attacks on Gulf civilian and energy infrastructure. But the question nobody has answered yet is what any of these governments actually do next. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, posted on social media that Iran used only a fraction of its power in the retaliatory strikes on Qatar, and said the only reason for restraint was respect for requested de-escalation. He warned that if Iranian infrastructure is struck again, Iran will show zero restraint. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian condemned the South Pars strikes and said they could have uncontrollable consequences, the scope of which could engulf the entire world. That framing, uncontrollable consequences, the scope of which could engulf the world, is not hyperbole when you look at the downstream effects already in motion. Wood Mackenzie's analysis notes that the North Field East expansion project, a 32 million tonne per year LNG capacity expansion at Ras Laffan that was already delayed into 2027, now faces further setbacks that could reshape global LNG supply growth through 2027 and 2028. Qatar is not just offline today. The architecture of future global gas supply is being physically destroyed faster than any investment decision can replace it. The ripple effects are visible on the ground in countries that have no stake in this war at all. Pakistan has shut schools for 2 weeks and moved to a 4-day government work week. India has begun rationing natural gas for manufacturers, with fertilizer plants receiving a maximum of 70% of their demand. Bangladesh, where natural gas-fired generation accounts for half of electricity supply, is implementing widespread gas rationing across the economy. 11 LNG tankers originally bound for Europe have rerouted to Asia since the war began, tightening European supply further. European policymakers have begun warning that if consumers do not start conserving now, the situation in April and May will be too late to manage. Goldman Sachs had already revised its second quarter oil forecasts upward before the South Pars strike. The figures now being floated, $130, $140 per barrel if the conflict extends into May, are not worst-case projections. They are baseline scenarios if nothing changes, and nothing in the current trajectory suggests anything is about to change. Here is where the strategic picture becomes genuinely difficult to read. Israel struck South Pars hours after Iranian missiles killed Iranian intelligence minister Esmail Khatib in an Israeli strike on Tehran. The South Pars attack was partly retaliation, partly escalation, and partly a signal. The IDF and the White House communicating to Tehran that Hormuz is not the only leverage point in this conflict. If Iran can choke off oil through the strait, Israel and the United States can choke off Iran's domestic energy supply from the upstream source. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth explicitly framed Israel's South Pars strike as a warning. He said Iran has weaponized energy for decades and called South Pars a demonstration of what the coalition can hold at risk. The Joint Chiefs Chairman, General Dan Kane, said the US is continuing to hunt and destroy Iranian ballistic missile launchers across the country. The Pentagon has confirmed it is exploring options including deploying thousands of additional ground troops to the region, potentially to secure the Strait of Hormuz or establish a presence on Karg Island, the hub for around 90% of Iran's oil exports. Iran's new supreme leader, Mujtaba Khamenei, who took office after his father's assassination on the opening day of the war, issued a statement vowing to avenge Iranian blood and declaring that the Strait of Hormuz would remain a tool of pressure against the West. He has yet to appear publicly on camera. The IRGC command structure remains intact. The missile campaign has not stopped, and now the energy war that analysts warned would be too catastrophic for either side to initiate has begun in earnest. Triggered not by Iran, but by Israel. 20 days in, the math does not resolve cleanly on any side. Iran's missile launch rate has declined from roughly 90 per day in the opening days of the war to smaller but more targeted salvos. The weapons have gotten more precise and more destructive as the volume has dropped. Israeli and American strikes claim to have eliminated between 75 and 80% of Iran's operational launchers, but South Pars is now burning. Ras Laffan has been struck 3 times. 2 Kuwaiti refineries are on fire. Saudi Arabia intercepted missiles targeting Riyadh and Yanbu. The UAE has suspended operations at 2 gas facilities, and the Qatar Energy CEO is talking about a 3 to 5 year repair timeline. Neither government, not Washington, not Jerusalem, not Tehran, has explained what the exit from this looks like before the global economy absorbs damage that outlasts any ceasefire by years. This is what an energy war running without an endpoint looks like. Not one dramatic explosion, a systematic dismantling of the infrastructure that keeps lights on across 4 continents, conducted in real time, with each side calculating that the next strike will finally force the other to blink. So far, nobody is blinking. Thanks for watching. If you want to follow this as it develops, subscribe and hit like. It genuinely helps this